The wagon wheel cracked like a gunshot, and Mira Tallwood knew her luck had finally run out. Stranded on a desolate Minnesota trail with nothing but a battered trunk and the shame of being a fool, she watched the driver ride off without a backward glance. The sun was dying behind the pines, and the cold was already crawling up from the ground. She had no money left to steal, no man left to betray her, and no prayer that hadn't already gone unanswered. Then hoofbeats broke the silence, and a stranger appeared through the dust, quiet, unsmiling, and far too still to be safe. If you're watching from somewhere out there, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far Mira's story can travel. And if this one hooks you, stay until the end. Hit that like button and let's ride this trail together. The wheel didn't just break. It shattered. Mira Tallwood heard the crack first, sharp and final, like the sound of a promise snapping in half. Then came the lurch, the scream of wood against iron, and the jolt that threw her sideways into the wagon bed. Her shoulder slammed against the rough pine boards, and for a moment, all she could do was lie there, tasting dust and blood where she'd bitten her tongue. "God damn it," the driver muttered. She pushed herself upright, blinking against the low autumn sun. The wagon had tilted hard to the left, listing like a dying ship. The rear wheel, what was left of it, lay in pieces across the trail, splintered spokes jutting out like broken ribs. The driver, a wiry man named Calhoun with a face like dried leather, climbed down and spat into the dirt. He didn't look at her, didn't ask if she was hurt. He just stood there, hands on his hips, staring at the wreckage with the expression of a man who'd already decided this wasn't his problem. "How bad is it?" Mira asked, though she already knew. "Bad enough." He kicked at a piece of the wheel, then glanced up the trail toward the distant line of pines. "Ain't fixing this before dark." Mira's stomach dropped. She looked around, taking in the endless stretch of empty road, the dense forest pressing in on both sides, the sky already bruising purple at the edges. They were miles from anywhere. Miles from Blackwater Crossing, the rough little frontier town where she'd planned to disappear into the hard work of an inn and never be noticed again. "What do we do?" she asked. Calhoun finally looked at her, and there was nothing in his eyes but cold arithmetic. "I do what I can. You do what you want." "What does that mean?" "Means I'm riding to the next settlement, getting a new wheel, and coming back. Might be tomorrow. Might be the day after." He walked to his horse, already tied to the front of the wagon, and started unhitching it. "You can wait here if you like." "Wait here? Alone?" "Ain't much choice in it." He swung up into the saddle, adjusting his hat. "You paid for passage to Blackwater, not a damn camping trip. I'll come back when I come back." "You can't just leave me." "Can and am." He turned the horse's head toward the north. "You got a bedroll in that trunk of yours. Fire'll keep the animals off. Probably." "Probably?" But he was already riding away, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the cold and the silence. Mira stood in the middle of the trail, her hands shaking, her breath coming short and fast. She wanted to scream, wanted to run after him, beg him, offer him something, anything, but she had nothing left to offer. The man in St. Paul had taken everything, her savings, her dignity, her stupid, stubborn belief that someone might actually keep a promise. She was 26 years old, and she had been a fool. The wind picked up, stirring the dust around her feet. She looked at the broken wagon, at the trunk that held everything she owned, 2 dresses, a shawl, a hairbrush, a few coins that wouldn't buy a meal. She looked at the darkening woods, at the trail that stretched in both directions like a scar across the land. And then she made a decision. She wasn't going to wait. Up. Mira had walked maybe 2 miles when the sun finally gave up and sank behind the trees. The temperature dropped fast, the kind of cold that came up from the earth and settled into your bones. Her feet ached, her shoulder throbbed where she'd hit the wagon. The small bundles she'd tied together, one dress, the shawl, the coins, felt heavier with every step. But she kept moving. The alternative was to sit down and let the night take her, and she'd be damned if she'd give the world that satisfaction. The road curved through a stand of birch trees, their white bark glowing faintly in the dusk. Somewhere to her left, she heard water, a creek maybe, or a river. The sound was steady, rhythmic, almost comforting. She thought about stopping, filling her canteen, but the idea of leaving the trail made her stomach twist. If she got lost out here, no one would ever find her. That's when she heard the hoofbeats. She froze, her heart hammering. The sound was coming from behind her, slow and deliberate. Not hurried, not frantic, just steady. She turned, squinting into the fading light. A rider emerged from the shadows. A man on a dark horse, broad-shouldered and still, silhouetted against the last bloody streaks of sunset. He didn't call out, didn't wave. He just rode toward her at an easy walk, close enough that she could see the rifle slung across his saddle, the wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. Mira's throat went dry. She took a step back, then another, her mind racing. Run, scream, do something. But there was nowhere to run, and no one to hear her scream. The man reined in about 10 feet away. For a long moment, he just sat there looking at her. Then he pushed his hat back and she saw his face, hard, weathered, maybe 30, maybe older. It was hard to tell with men like him, men who lived outside and spoke little and carried the kind of stillness that came from being alone too long. His eyes were pale, gray or blue. She couldn't tell in the dim light. His jaw was shadowed with a few days' worth of stubble. He didn't smile. "You lost?" he asked. His voice was low, rough, like gravel underfoot. Mira lifted her chin, trying to steady herself. "No." He glanced past her, down the empty trail, then back at her. "You're walking to Blackwater?" "I am. It's 15 miles. I know. You won't make it before full dark." "I'll manage." He studied her for another moment, his expression unreadable. Then he shifted in the saddle, the leather creaking. "Wagon break down?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Driver leave you?" Another nod. The man exhaled slowly, a sound that might have been frustration or sympathy. She couldn't tell. He looked away, out toward the trees, and for a moment she thought he was going to ride off and leave her just like Calhoun had. But he didn't. "There's a cabin about a mile west of here," he said finally. "Got a roof, a fire, some food. You can stay the night. I'll take you into town come morning." Mira's pulse kicked. "I don't need charity." "Didn't offer charity. Offered a roof." He met her eyes again, and there was no heat in his gaze, no hunger, no hidden calculation. Just blankness. "Your choice." She wanted to say no, wanted to tell him she'd rather freeze than owe a stranger anything. But her feet hurt, her shoulder ached, and the cold was already seeping through her shawl. And he was right. She wouldn't make 15 miles before dark. "What's your name?" she asked. "Rowan Ashford." "I'm Mira Tallwood." He nodded once, as if that settled something. Then he dismounted, slow and deliberate, and held out the reins. "You can ride." "I'll walk." "I can walk." "You've been walking." He didn't move, just stood there holding the reins, waiting. "Get on the horse, Miss Tallwood." There was no command in his voice, no impatience, just a plain statement of fact. Mira looked at the horse, a big bay gelding with kind eyes and a calm stance. Then she looked at Rowan Ashford, standing there like a man who'd wait all night if he had to. She took the reins. The cabin sat at the edge of a wide, dark lake, nestled into a clearing surrounded by pines and birch. It was small, one room, by the look of it, but solid, built from thick logs chinked with clay, a stone chimney rising from one end. Smoke curled from the chimney, faint and gray against the night sky. Rowan had walked the whole way in silence, one hand on the horse's bridle, his rifle slung over his shoulder. Mira had tried to speak a few times, to thank him or explain herself, but the words kept dying in her throat. He didn't seem to expect conversation. When they reached the cabin, he tied the horse to a post near a small lean-to stable, then gestured toward the door. "Go on in. I'll see to the horse." Mira hesitated, then pushed the door open. The inside was warm. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering light across rough-hewn furniture. A table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner covered with a patchwork quilt. The walls were bare except for a few hooks holding a coat, a hat, a pair of worn saddlebags. Everything was clean, sparse, functional. She set her bundle on the table and stood there, unsure what to do with herself. A few minutes later, Rowan came in, closing the door behind him. He hung his hat on a hook, leaned the rifle against the wall, and went to the fire without a word. He added another log, stirred the coals, then filled a dented kettle from a bucket near the hearth and set it over the flames. "Coffee'll be ready soon," he said. "There's bread in that tin. Help yourself." Mira looked at the tin on the table, then at him. You live here alone? I do. For how long? 5 years. Why here? He glanced at her, and for the first time something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been amusement. Why anywhere? She didn't have an answer for that. He pulled out one of the chairs and sat down, leaning back against the wall, his long legs stretched out in front of him. He looked tired. Not weak, just worn. Like a man who'd carried too much for too long. You don't have to be afraid of me, he said quietly. Mira stiffened. I'm not. You are. He didn't say it unkindly, just matter of fact. And I don't blame you, world being what it is. She looked away, her throat tight. I've learned to be careful. Good. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. You'll sleep in the bed. I'll take the floor by the fire. Door'll be barred from the inside. You want to leave in the middle of the night? You can. Won't stop you. Mira stared at him. Why would you do that? Do what? Give up your bed. Sleep on the floor. He shrugged. Because you need it more than I do. You don't know me. Don't need to. He stood, went to the fire, and poured coffee into 2 tin cups. He set one in front of her, then sat back down with the other. Drink. It'll help with the cold. She wrapped her hands around the cup, the heat seeping into her frozen fingers. The coffee was strong, bitter, exactly what she needed. She took a sip, then another, and felt the warmth spread through her chest. Rowan drank in silence, his eyes on the fire. Why are you helping me? Mira asked finally. He didn't answer right away. Just sat there, turning the cup in his hands, watching the flames. When he spoke, his voice was low and distant. Because someone helped me once, he said, when I needed it. Who? Doesn't matter. He looked at her then, and his gaze was steady, unflinching. Point is, you don't leave people on the road, not if you can help it. Mira's chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to tell him that people did leave you, that they took what they wanted and walked away without a backward glance. But something in his face stopped her. He wasn't lying. He wasn't performing kindness to earn something later. He just meant it, and that terrified her more than anything else. She didn't sleep well. The bed was comfortable enough, more comfortable than the wagon, certainly, but her mind wouldn't settle. She kept listening for sounds, footsteps, the scrape of a chair, the creak of the door. But all she heard was the fire and Rowan's steady breathing from the floor. When dawn broke, pale and cold through the single window, she sat up and saw him already awake, crouched by the hearth, stirring the coals back to life. Morning, he said without turning around. Morning. He stood, dusted off his hands, and went to the table. I'll make some breakfast, then we'll head into town. You don't have to. I know. He met her eyes. But I'm going to. And that was the end of it. Blackwater Crossing was rough even by frontier standards. A single muddy street lined with wooden buildings that looked like they'd been thrown together in a hurry and never quite finished. A general store, a blacksmith, a saloon with a crooked sign, and at the far end, the inn, a squat 2-story structure with a sagging porch and a hand-painted sign that read rooms and meals. Rowan reined in near the inn and dismounted. Mira climbed down after him, her legs stiff from the ride. This is it, he said, nodding toward the building. Owner's name is Beatrice Dunn. She's tough, but fair. Tell her you're looking for work. She might take you on. Mira looked at the inn, then at him. What if she doesn't? Then you come find me. He gestured down the street. I'll be at the general store. Need to pick up some supplies. Rowan. He turned, waiting. She wanted to thank him, wanted to say something that would match what he'd done for her. But the words felt too small. I won't forget this, she said finally. He nodded once. Good luck, Miss Tallwood. And then he walked away, leading his horse down the muddy street, leaving her standing there alone. Mira took a breath, squared her shoulders, and walked into the inn. Beatrice Dunn was a tall, broad-shouldered woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that could cut glass. She looked Mira up and down like she was appraising livestock. You the girl Rowan brought in? She asked. I am. He said you were looking for work. I am. Beatrice crossed her arms. You got experience? Some. I worked in a boarding house in St. Paul, cooking, cleaning, laundry. Why'd you leave? Mira's jaw tightened. Personal reasons. Beatrice snorted. Always are. She turned, heading toward the back of the inn. Follow me. The kitchen was hot and chaotic, pots boiling on the stove, dirty dishes piled in a basin, the smell of bacon grease and lye soap thick in the air. A younger woman, maybe 20, was scrubbing a cast iron skillet with furious determination, her face flushed and sweaty. This is Nora, Beatrice said. She'll show you what needs doing. You work hard, you eat and sleep here. You slack off, you're out. Understood? Understood? Good. Beatrice looked her over one more time, then nodded. You start now. And just like that, Mira Tallwood had a job. The work was brutal. Mira scrubbed floors until her knees were raw, hauled water until her back screamed, washed sheets in scalding lye that left her hands cracked and bleeding. Beatrice ran the inn like a field general, barking orders and accepting no excuses. Nora was kind but overworked, moving through the day with the grim efficiency of someone who'd long since stopped expecting anything better. But Mira didn't complain. She kept her head down, did the work, and at night collapsed into the narrow cot in the back room she shared with Nora, too exhausted to dream. Days turned into weeks. The cold deepened. The first snow fell, dusting the muddy street with white that turned to brown slush by noon. Blackwater Crossing settled into the rhythm of winter, slow, hard, unyielding. And through it all, Rowan Ashford kept his distance. Mira saw him sometimes, riding into town for supplies or stopping at the blacksmith. He'd nod if their eyes met, tip his hat, but he never approached, never asked how she was doing, never tried to claim some debt for what he'd done. It should have been a relief. Instead, it nagged at her, made her restless in a way she couldn't name. One afternoon, as she was hauling firewood from the back of the inn, she saw him across the street, loading sacks of grain onto his horse. He worked with the same quiet efficiency she remembered from that first night. No wasted movement, no hurry. Before she could think better of it, she crossed the street. Rowan. He looked up, surprised. Miss Tallwood. Mira, she said. Just Mira. He nodded. Mira. They stood there for a moment, the cold wind biting at their faces. I wanted to thank you, she said. For what you did. For bringing me here. No need. There is. She met his eyes. You didn't have to help me. Most men wouldn't have. Something shifted in his expression, something that might have been pain. Most men are fools. Maybe. She pulled her shawl tighter. But you're not. He looked away, back at the grain sacks. You settling in all right? I am. Beatrice works me half to death, but I've had worse. Good. He tied off the last sack, then straightened. You need anything? You let me know. I will. He tipped his hat. Take care, Mira. And he rode away, leaving her standing in the cold, wondering why his absence felt like a door closing. Basset. Winter deepened. The lake froze solid. The wind howled through the gaps in the inn's walls, and no amount of fire could chase the cold away. Mira worked, ate, slept, and woke to do it all again. But something had changed. She found herself watching for Rowan when he came to town, found herself listening for the sound of his horse, the low rumble of his voice when he spoke to the blacksmith or the storekeeper. She told herself it was gratitude, told herself she just wanted to repay him somehow. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She thought about the way he'd looked at her that first night. No judgment, no expectation. The way he'd given up his bed and asked for nothing in return. The way he'd brought her to town and then left her alone, trusting her to build her own life. No one had ever trusted her like that. No one had ever just let her be. And now, standing in the cold with her hands raw and her back aching, Mira Tallwood realized something that terrified her. She didn't want to be alone anymore. It was late February when everything changed. Mira was in the kitchen, elbow deep in dishwater, when Beatrice came in and dropped a letter on the table. For you, she said. Mira stared at it. From who? How the hell should I know? Just came in on the stage. Mira dried her hands and picked up the letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat, precise, unmistakably feminine. She broke the seal and unfolded the paper. Dear Miss Tallwood, my name is Caroline Mercer. I run a dressmaking shop in St. Paul and am in need of a skilled seamstress. Your name was given to me by a mutual acquaintance who spoke highly of your work. If you are interested, I can offer room, board, and fair wages. Please reply at your earliest convenience. Yours truly, Caroline Mercer. Mira read the letter twice, her heart pounding. A job. In St. Paul. A chance to leave Blackwater Crossing, to start over somewhere new, somewhere no one knew her past. She should have felt relief. Excitement. Instead, all she felt was dread. Because leaving meant never seeing Rowan Ashford again. And somewhere along the way, without meaning to, that had started to matter. She didn't answer the letter right away. Instead, she folded it carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket, where it sat like a stone against her ribs. That night, lying in her cot, she stared at the ceiling and tried to think. St. Paul meant safety, distance, a life where no one could hurt her because no one would get close enough to try, but it also meant running, again, and Mira was tired of running. The next morning, she woke with a decision half-formed in her mind. She didn't know if it was the right one, didn't know if she'd regret it, but for the first time in her life, she was going to choose something for herself. Not out of fear, not out of desperation, just because she wanted to. She got dressed, pulled on her shawl, and walked out into the freezing dawn. She was going to find Rowan Ashford, and she was going to tell him the truth. The walk to Rowan's cabin felt longer than she remembered. The frozen lake stretched out to her left, a vast white expanse broken only by the dark line of the far shore and the skeletal trees that marked its edge. Her breath came in short white clouds, and the cold bit through her shawl like teeth. She hadn't told Beatrice where she was going, hadn't told Nora. She just slipped out while the kitchen was still dark and walked. By the time the cabin came into view, her feet were numb and her cheeks burned from the wind. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin gray line. The horse was in the lean-to, its dark shape visible through the weathered slats. Everything looked exactly as it had that first night, solid and quiet and apart from the world. Mira stopped at the edge of the clearing, her courage faltering. What was she doing here? What was she going to say? I got a letter offering me a job in St. Paul, but I came here instead because I can't stop thinking about you? It sounded ridiculous, even in her own head. Before she could turn back, the cabin door opened. Rowan stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other holding a tin cup. He was in his shirt sleeves despite the cold, his suspenders hanging loose at his sides. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then set the cup on the porch railing. Mira, he said. Not a question, just her name. She walked toward him, her hands clenched inside her shawl. I'm sorry, I know it's early. It's all right. He stepped aside, gesturing into the cabin. Come in, you'll freeze out here. The warmth inside was a shock after the cold. Mira stood by the fire, her hands extended toward the flames, feeling slowly returning to her fingers. Rowan closed the door and went to the stove, pouring coffee into a second cup without asking if she wanted it. Here, he said, handing it to her. She took it, wrapping both hands around the warm metal. Thank you. He leaned against the table, arms crossed, waiting. He didn't rush her, didn't ask why she'd come, just waited. Mira took a breath. I got a letter. From a woman in St. Paul. She's offering me a job as a seamstress. Something flickered in his eyes, but his voice stayed even. That's good. Better work than the inn. Better pay too. Room and board included. When do you leave? I don't know. She looked down at the coffee, at her own reflection wavering in the dark liquid. I haven't answered it yet. Why not? The question hung in the air between them. Mira felt her throat tighten. This was it. The moment where she either told the truth or walked away and spent the rest of her life wondering what might have happened if she'd been brave enough to speak. Because I don't know if I want to go, she said quietly. Rowan was silent for a long moment. When she finally looked up, he was watching her with an intensity that made her chest ache. What do you want? He asked. I don't know. The words came out sharper than she intended. I spent so long just trying to survive, I forgot how to want anything. That's not true. It is. She set the cup down on the table, her hands shaking. I wanted safety. I wanted to stop being afraid. I wanted a life where no one could hurt me. And St. Paul would give me that. A new city, a new name if I wanted it, a place where no one knows what happened to me. But it would also mean leaving here, leaving Blackwater Crossing, leaving. She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Leaving what? His voice was low, careful. Leaving you. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fire seemed to quiet. Rowan pushed off the table and walked to the window, looking out at the frozen lake. His back was to her, his shoulders tense. When he spoke, his voice was rough. You don't owe me anything, Mira. I know that. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected something in return. I know that too. She moved closer, stopping a few feet behind him. But that doesn't change how I feel. He turned then, and the look on his face nearly undid her. It wasn't blank anymore. It was raw and uncertain and afraid in a way she'd never seen from him. How do you feel? He asked. Mira's heart hammered. Like maybe I don't want to spend the rest of my life running. Like maybe there's something here worth staying for. The inn? No. She held his gaze. You. Rowan exhaled slowly, his hands clenching at his sides. You shouldn't. You should take that job and go build yourself a good life. You should go somewhere safe. Why? Because I'm not... He stopped, his jaw working. Because I'm not what you think I am. Then tell me what you are. He looked away, out the window again. I'm a man who lost his wife and daughter to fever 6 years ago. I'm a man who came out here to get away from people because I couldn't stand being around anyone who remembered them. I'm a man who's been half alive ever since, just going through the motions. He turned back to her. That's not what you need, Mira. You need someone whole, someone who can give you what you deserve. The pain in his voice cut deeper than anything he was saying. Mira took another step closer. What if I don't need someone whole, she said. What if I just need someone honest? You don't know what you're saying. Yes, I do. She was close enough now to see the lines around his eyes, the gray threaded through his dark hair. You think I don't understand loss? I lost everything, too. My savings, my trust, my belief that anyone would ever keep their word. The difference is, you lost people you loved. I lost people who never deserved me in the first place. She took a shaky breath, and then you came along and showed me what decency looks like. You didn't make promises, you didn't ask for anything, you just helped me because it was right. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Rowan's hands unclenched slowly. You're making too much of it. I'm not making enough of it. She reached out, hesitated, then let her hand fall. I'm not asking you to fix me, Rowan. I'm not asking you to save me. I'm just asking if maybe we could stop being alone together. His eyes searched hers, and she saw the war happening behind them. Hope fighting with fear, wanting fighting with guilt. I don't know if I remember how to be with someone, he said finally. Then we'll figure it out. Her voice was steadier now. If you want to. If you don't, just say so, and I'll go. I'll take the job in St. Paul and you'll never have to see me again. But if there's any part of you that wants this, that wants me, then tell me. Because I'm tired of being careful. I'm tired of protecting myself from every possible hurt. I want to live again, Rowan, and I think maybe you do too. The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Then Rowan closed the distance in 2 steps and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and clumsy and fierce, his hands cupping her face, her fingers clutching at his shirt. It tasted like coffee and hope and 6 years of loneliness breaking open all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Rowan pressed his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Please stay. Mira's eyes burned. I'm staying. He kissed her again, softer this time, like he was memorizing the shape of her mouth, the feel of her skin. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. I don't know how to do this right, he said. Neither do I. She smiled, shaky and real. But maybe that's all right. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Mira felt safe. Not because he was strong or capable, or because he'd rescued her from the road. but because he was as broken as she was, and he wasn't trying to hide it. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other while the fire crackled and the winter wind rattled the windows. When they finally separated, Rowan went to the stove and started pulling out ingredients: flour, salt, a jar of preserves. You eaten yet? No. Then sit. I'll make breakfast. Mira sat at the table, watching him move around the small kitchen with quiet efficiency. He worked the way he did everything else. No wasted motion, no fuss, gas, just steady, competent care. You cook often? She asked. Every day. Not much choice when you live alone. What about before? When you had... She trailed off, uncertain. When I had a family? He didn't look up from the dough he was kneading. Sarah did most of the cooking. She was better at it than me. But I learned after. Had to. What was she like? He was quiet for a moment, his hands working the dough. Kind, patient. She could make anyone feel like they mattered, even when they were being difficult. Emma was the same way. Our daughter. She was only 4 when... He stopped, swallowed hard. When the fever came. Mira's chest tightened. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. He shaped the dough into rounds and set them on a cast iron skillet. Doesn't make it hurt less, but you learn to carry it different. Do you still think about them? Every day. He looked at her then, his eyes clear. But that doesn't mean I'm not allowed to think about you too. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. They ate in comfortable silence. Warm bread with butter and preserves, more coffee, the simple sustenance of people who'd both known hunger and didn't take food for granted. When they were done, Rowan cleared the plates and went to the fire, adding another log. You should get back, he said. Beatrice will be wondering where you went. Probably. Mira stood, reluctant to leave. When will I see you again? I'll be in town tomorrow. Need to pick up some nails at the blacksmith. He hesitated. Could meet you after your shift, if you want. I want. He walked her to the door. Before she stepped out into the cold, he caught her hand. Mira. She turned. I meant what I said. About staying. I know. She squeezed his hand. So did I. The walk back to town felt shorter, lighter. The cold didn't bite as hard. The sky seemed brighter. Mira knew she was being foolish, letting herself feel this way after one conversation, one kiss. But she was tired of being sensible, tired of protecting herself from joy just because it might not last. Whatever happened, at least she'd tried. When she slipped back into the inn, Nora was in the kitchen, already elbow-deep in breakfast preparations. She looked up, her eyebrows raised. Where have you been? Walking, Mira said. In this cold? You're crazy. Maybe. Mira tied on her apron, unable to keep the smile off her face. But I feel good. Nora stared at her for a moment, then grinned. You met someone. I didn't meet him. I already knew him. Who? Rowan Ashford. Nora's eyes widened. The man who brought you to town, the one who lives out by the lake? That's him. Mira. Nora set down the knife she'd been using and came closer, lowering her voice. You need to be careful. People talk about him. Mira's stomach dropped. What do they say? That he's strange. That he doesn't talk to anyone, doesn't come to church, doesn't do anything normal folks do. Some people think he's dangerous. He's not. The words came out sharper than Mira intended. He's just private. And grieving. Grieving what? His wife and daughter. They died 6 years ago. Nora's expression softened. Oh, I didn't know that. Most people don't. They just judge him without knowing anything about him. Mira picked up a bowl and started mixing batter with more force than necessary. He's a good man, Nora. Better than most I've known. I believe you. Nora touched her arm. Just be careful, all right? Not because he's dangerous, but because the town can be cruel to people who don't fit. Mira nodded, but the words stayed with her all day. She'd been so focused on her own feelings, she hadn't thought about what it would mean to care about someone the town had already decided was an outsider. But then again, she was an outsider too. Maybe that's why they fit. The next day, Rowan came to town just as he'd promised. Mira saw him from the inn's upstairs window, tying his horse outside the blacksmith shop. Her heart did something foolish and fluttery, and she had to force herself to focus on scrubbing the floor instead of running down to meet him. When her shift finally ended, she found him waiting outside, leaning against the porch railing. "Hey," he said. "Hey." They walked together down the muddy street, not touching, but close enough that their shoulders almost brushed. People stared. Mira could feel their eyes, hear the whispers starting. She lifted her chin and ignored them. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Thought I'd show you something, if you're not too tired." "I'm not." He led her out of town, along a narrow path that wound through the trees. The snow was deeper here, untouched except for animal tracks. After about 20 minutes, they emerged into a clearing. Mira stopped, her breath catching. In the center of the clearing was a grove of birch trees, their white bark glowing in the late afternoon light. The branches were bare, but someone had hung dozens of small objects from them, pieces of colored glass, bits of polished stone, carved wooden birds. They turned slowly in the wind, catching the light and throwing it back in flashes of red and blue and green. "What is this?" she whispered. "Something I made," Rowan said quietly, "for Sarah and Emma. After they died, I couldn't stand being in the house we'd shared, so I came out here and started building this. Took me 2 years to finish." Mira walked closer, reaching out to touch a piece of blue glass shaped like a teardrop. "It's beautiful." "It's grief," he said. "But I wanted it to be beautiful too. Felt like they deserved that." She turned to look at him. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I wanted you to know." He came to stand beside her, his eyes on the hanging ornaments. "I wanted you to know that I loved them, that I'll always love them, and that doesn't mean I can't love you too." Mira's throat closed. "Rowan, you don't have to say anything." He looked at her then, and his eyes were clear and steady. "I just needed you to know that I'm not trying to replace them with you. You're not a substitute for what I lost. You're something new, something I didn't expect and don't deserve but want anyway." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "You do deserve it. You deserve to be happy again." "So do you." They stood there in the clearing, holding hands while the glass ornaments sang in the wind, and Mira felt something settle in her chest. This was real, messy and complicated, and nothing like the fairy tales she'd stopped believing in years ago, but real. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Rowan would come to town twice a week for supplies, and they'd walk together when Mira's shift ended. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just walked in silence, comfortable with each other's presence. He told her about his life before the fever, about Sarah's laugh and Emma's tendency to collect rocks and feathers. Mira told him about growing up with nothing, about the boarding house in St. Paul, about the man who'd promised to marry her and then vanished with her savings. "I was so stupid," she said one evening as they sat by the lake, wrapped in blankets against the cold. "I believed every word he said." "That doesn't make you stupid," Rowan said. "Just hopeful. Hope is dangerous. So is breathing, but we do it anyway." He pulled her closer. "You can't protect yourself from everything, Mira. At some point you have to decide if living is worth the risk." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Is it? Worth the risk?" "I don't know yet." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "But I'm starting to think it might be." The town's whispers grew louder. Beatrice cornered Mira in the kitchen one afternoon, her arms crossed and her expression stern. "You're making a mistake," she said bluntly. "I'm not." "That man's trouble. He doesn't fit here, doesn't want to fit here. You tie yourself to him, you'll be an outsider too." "I already am an outsider," Mira said. "I came here with nothing and no one. At least with Rowan, I won't be alone." Beatrice's expression softened slightly. "You're a good worker, Mira. I don't want to see you throw your life away on someone who can't give you what you need." "What do I need?" "Stability, respect, a place in the community." "I don't care about the community." The words surprised Mira even as she said them, but she realized they were true. "I care about being with someone who sees me, who doesn't want me to be anything other than what I am." "And you think that's him?" "I know it is." Beatrice sighed. "Well, you're a grown woman. You'll do what you want. Just don't say I didn't warn you." But the warning didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the way Rowan looked at her, the way his hands were gentle when he touched her face, the way he never asked her to be smaller or quieter or less than she was. One night in early March, as winter started to loosen its grip, Rowan asked her to marry him. They were at the cabin, sitting by the fire after a simple dinner. The question came without preamble, without getting down on one knee or presenting a ring. "Will you marry me?" he said. Mira looked up from the sock she was mending, her hands frozen. "What?" "I know it's fast. I know people will talk, but I don't care about any of that." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I care about you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and go to sleep next to you every night. I want to build a life with you, whatever that looks like. So will you marry me?" Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear over it. "You're serious? Dead serious?" "Rowan, I don't have anything. No dowry, no family, no... I don't care about any of that." He reached for her hand. "I just care about you." Mira looked at their joined hands, at the calluses on his palms that matched her own. She thought about the letter still tucked in her drawer at the inn, the job offer in St. Paul that she'd never answered. She thought about the life she could have had, safe, solitary, protected from hurt. And then she thought about this, about sitting by a fire with a man who'd lost everything and still had the courage to try again, about building something real instead of just surviving. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Rowan pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. When he kissed her, it felt like a promise. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the edge of town, with only Nora and the blacksmith as witnesses. Beatrice didn't come, and neither did anyone else from the inn. The preacher performed the service with a pinched expression, clearly disapproving but needing the fee too much to refuse. Mira wore the best dress she owned, mended and cleaned until it was presentable. Rowan wore a suit that had clearly been packed away for years, smelling faintly of cedar and mothballs. They spoke their vows in steady voices, and when the preacher pronounced them married, Rowan kissed her like he was sealing a contract written in blood and hope. Afterwards, they rode back to the cabin together, Mira sitting in front of Rowan on the horse, his arms solid around her waist. The spring sun was warm on their faces, and the ice on the lake was starting to crack and shift, revealing dark water beneath. "What now?" Mira asked as they approached the cabin. "Now we live," Rowan said simply. And that's exactly what they did. Living, as it turned out, was harder than either of them expected. The cabin was small, and they were two people who'd grown used to solitude. Rowan had his rhythms, rising before dawn, checking the traps, splitting wood in the quiet hours when the world was still gray and hushed. Mira had hers, years of scrubbing floors and washing sheets, of moving quickly and keeping her head down. They collided in the tiny space, awkward and uncertain, like two animals forced to share a den. The first morning after the wedding, Mira woke to find Rowan already gone. Panic seized her chest before she saw the note on the table, written in his careful hand, "Checking traps. Back by noon. Coffee's on the stove." She sat at the table with her cup, feeling foolish. This was what she'd wanted. This was what she'd chosen. But the silence of the cabin pressed in on her, and she realized she didn't know how to be someone's wife. Didn't know what was expected, what he wanted, what she was supposed to do with herself now that she wasn't scrubbing other people's floors. When Rowan returned, 2 rabbits slung over his shoulder, she was standing by the window, staring at the lake. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine." He set the rabbits on the workbench and came to stand beside her. "You're not fine." Mira's throat tightened. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do here." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I don't know how to be a wife. I don't know what you expect from me." Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I don't expect anything except that you be yourself. That's all I ever wanted." "But what about the work, the cooking, the cleaning, all the things wives are supposed to... We'll figure it out together." He turned her to face him. "Mira, I didn't marry you so you could be my housekeeper. I married you because I couldn't imagine going through another day without you. Everything else, we'll learn as we go." She searched his eyes, looking for doubt or frustration, but found only patience. "What if I'm terrible at it? Then we'll both be terrible together." He kissed her forehead. "Now come help me skin these rabbits. You ever done that before?" "No." "Good. I'll teach you." They worked side by side at the bench, Rowan's hands guiding hers, showing her how to make the first cut, how to peel the skin back without tearing the meat. It was messy, bloody work, and Mira's hands shook at first, but Rowan was patient. When she finally held up the cleaned carcass, her hands stained red and her dress splattered, he grinned. Not bad for a first try. It looks awful. It looks like dinner. He took it from her and hung it from a hook. You'll get better. Everything takes practice. That became the pattern of their days. Rowan would rise early and do the heavy work, chopping wood, hauling water from the lake, tending the small garden plot he'd started behind the cabin. Mira would cook what she could with the limited supplies they had, clean what needed cleaning, and slowly learn the 100 small skills that frontier life demanded. She learned to make bread that didn't come out hard as stone, to mend clothes with stitches that actually held, to identify which plants growing near the lake were edible and which would make you sick. But the town didn't make it easy. When they rode in for supplies 2 weeks after the wedding, the stairs were even colder than before. Women pulled their children closer when Mira walked past. Men muttered to each other behind their hands. At the general store, the clerk took his time serving them, making them wait while he helped everyone else first. "Congratulations on your marriage," he said finally, his tone making it clear he thought it was anything but congratulatory. "Thank you," Rowan said evenly. "Surprised to see you settling down, Ashford. Figured you liked being alone out there." "Things change." The clerk looked at Mira, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "I suppose they do. Though I heard you had a perfectly good job at the inn, Miss Tallwood. Or should I say Mrs. Ashford now?" "You should," Mira said, lifting her chin. "Shame you gave it up. Beatrice could have used the help." "I'm sure she'll manage." The clerk smirked. "I'm sure she will. Not like there's much work to be had out at that cabin anyway. Just sitting around all day while your husband does the real labor." Rowan's hand clenched on the counter. "Is there a point to this conversation?" "No point. Just making talk." The clerk started wrapping their purchases with deliberate slowness. "Though I will say, folks around here are wondering what kind of woman marries a man she barely knows and moves out to the middle of nowhere. Some might call it desperate." Mira felt her face flush, but before she could respond, Rowan leaned across the counter. "And some might call it none of your damn business," he said quietly. "Now, finish wrapping our goods so we can leave." The clerk's smirk faded. He finished the job in silence and took their money without another word. Outside, Mira was shaking. Rowan loaded the supplies onto the horse, his movements tight and controlled. "I'm sorry," Mira said. "For what?" "For making your life harder, for giving them something to talk about." He turned to her, his eyes fierce. "You didn't make my life harder. You made it worth living again. And if they can't see that, that's their problem, not ours." But the encounters kept coming. At the blacksmith, they were told the nails Rowan needed wouldn't be ready for weeks, even though they could see a pile of them sitting on the workbench. At the feed store, the prices were suddenly higher than they'd been the week before. Small cruelties, designed to remind them that they didn't belong. One afternoon, as Mira was filling their water buckets at the town pump, 3 women approached. She recognized them from the inn, customers who'd never bothered to learn her name, but had been quick to complain about the temperature of their tea or the stiffness of their sheets. "Mrs. Ashford," one of them said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How are you finding married life?" "Well enough," Mira said carefully. "I imagine it must be quite an adjustment. Going from the inn to that little cabin must feel rather isolated." "I don't mind the quiet." "No, I suppose you wouldn't." The woman exchanged glances with her companions. "Though I do wonder what you do with yourself all day. It's not as if there's much society out there." "I keep busy." "I'm sure you do." Another woman leaned in, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Though between us, dear, you should be careful. A man like Rowan Ashford, living alone all those years, well, there are reasons he stayed away from town. Reasons decent people don't talk about." Mira's hand stilled on the pump handle. "What are you implying?" "Nothing, nothing," the woman straightened, all innocence. "Just that it's strange, isn't it? A man who lost his family and then shut himself away. Makes one wonder what he might be hiding." "He's not hiding anything," Mira said, her voice hard. "He's grieving and trying to heal. Not that any of you would understand that." "Well," the first woman sniffed, "there's no need to be rude. We were only trying to help." "I don't need your help." Clearly. They turned to leave, but not before Mira heard one of them mutter, "Give it a year. She'll come crawling back to town, mark my words." Mira finished filling the buckets with shaking hands, anger and humiliation burning in her chest. When she got back to the cabin, Rowan took one look at her face and set down the axe he'd been sharpening. What happened? She told him, the words tumbling out in a rush. When she finished, Rowan's jaw was tight. I'm sorry, he said. You keep apologizing, but it's not your fault. It is. If you hadn't married me, if I hadn't married you, I'd be alone and miserable, working myself to death for people who never saw me as anything more than a pair of hands. She crossed the room and took his face in her hands. I chose this, Rowan. I chose you, and I don't regret it. Even when they treat you like that? Especially then, because it means I'm doing something that scares them. She smiled grimly. I'm living on my own terms instead of theirs, and that terrifies small-minded people. He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. You're stronger than I am. No, I'm just tired of being afraid. But as spring deepened into summer, the isolation began to wear on both of them. The garden grew, providing fresh vegetables that broke the monotony of salt pork and hardtack. The lake thawed completely, opening up new possibilities for fishing. But the work was endless and exhausting, and the town's hostility meant they had no one to turn to when things went wrong. When the plow blade broke in late May, Rowan had to ride to Blackwater Crossing for a replacement. He was gone for 6 hours, and Mira spent every minute of it pacing the cabin, jumping at every sound, convinced that something had happened to him. When he finally returned, she threw herself into his arms, surprising them both. I thought something happened, she said against his chest. I'm fine. Just took longer than expected. He stroked her hair. The blacksmith made me wait. Of course he did. Mira. Rowan pulled back to look at her. We can't keep living like this. Always angry, always braced for the next insult. What choice do we have? We could leave. Go somewhere else. Somewhere no one knows us. The suggestion hung in the air between them. Mira thought about it, truly thought about it. A fresh start in a new town, away from the whispers and the judgment. It was tempting, but it was also running. Again. No, she said finally. No? We're not leaving. This is our home. We built this together. We're not going to let them drive us away from it. Rowan studied her face, then nodded slowly. All right. Then we stay. We stay. But staying meant finding a way to survive that didn't depend on the town's goodwill. Rowan started making longer trips to settlements farther north, trading furs and smoked fish for supplies. It meant he was gone for days at a time, and Mira had to learn to manage the cabin alone. The first time he left her, she was terrified. The second time, she was merely anxious. By the fourth time, she'd settled into a routine, checking the traps, tending the garden, keeping the fire going, and sleeping with the rifle loaded beside the bed. She was stronger than she'd thought. Harder. The work had carved muscle into her arms and calluses onto her palms. Her skin had browned from the sun, and her hands were always stained with dirt or blood or both. She looked at herself in the small mirror Rowan had hung by the wash basin and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like someone who could survive anything. And maybe she could. One evening in late June, Rowan came home from a trading trip with news. He set his pack down by the door, his expression troubled. What is it? Mira asked. I heard something in Barrett's Creek about a seamstress job opening up in St. Paul. Mira's stomach dropped. The same one? From the letter? I don't know. Maybe. He sat down heavily at the table. The man I was trading with mentioned it, said his sister was looking to hire someone skilled. I thought you should know. Why are you telling me this? Rowan looked at her, his eyes tired. Because I want you to have choices. I don't want you to wake up one day and resent me because I took options away from you. You didn't take anything away. Didn't I? He gestured around the cabin. This is a hard life, Mira. Harder than I think either of us expected. And it's not going to get easier. Winter's coming again, and we barely made it through the last one. If you wanted to go to St. Paul, take that job, have an easier life. I don't want an easier life. She crossed to him, kneeling beside his chair. I want this life. With you. Even when I'm gone for days at a time, even when we're scraping by on rabbits and turnips, even when the whole town treats you like you're something shameful. Yes. She took his hands, all of it. Because it's ours, Rowan. We built it, and I'm not giving it up. He pulled her into his lap, holding her tight. I don't deserve you. Yes, you do. She kissed him. We both deserve this. We both deserve to be happy. But happiness, Mira was learning, wasn't a destination. It was something you had to fight for every single day. In July, the heat became oppressive. The lake shrank, revealing muddy banks littered with dead fish. The garden wilted despite their best efforts to water it. Tempers frayed. They snapped at each other over small things, the way Rowan left his boots by the door, the way Mira hummed while she worked. The fights were brief but sharp, leaving them both feeling raw and guilty. After one particularly bitter argument about whether to slaughter one of their chickens for food, Rowan stormed out of the cabin and didn't come back until nightfall. Mira sat at the table, her hands shaking, convinced that this was it. This was when he'd realize he'd made a mistake marrying her. This was when he'd tell her to leave. But when he came back, he just sat down across from her. I'm sorry, he said. Me too. This is harder than I thought it would be. I know. He reached across the table and she took his hand. But I still want it. I still want you. Even when I'm impossible? Especially then. He smiled faintly. Means you're still fighting. They made love that night with a desperation that surprised them both, clinging to each other like drowning people to driftwood. Afterwards, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Mira felt something shift inside her. Not hope, exactly. More like determination. We're going to make it, she said into the darkness. You sound sure. I am. She traced patterns on his chest. Because we're both too stubborn to give up. Rowan laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. That's probably true. August brought a brief respite from the heat. Rain fell for 3 days straight, filling the lake and reviving the garden. They spent those days inside, reading from Rowan's small collection of books, playing cards, talking about everything and nothing. It felt like a gift, this small pocket of peace in the middle of all the struggle. On the 4th day, when the rain finally stopped, they walked to the birch grove together. The glass ornaments Rowan had made for his family sparkled with raindrops, throwing rainbows across the wet ground. Mira stood beneath them, looking up at the dancing light. Do you still miss them? She asked. Every day. Rowan came to stand beside her. But it doesn't hurt the same way it used to. Like the edges have worn smooth. Do you think they'd approve? Of me? He was quiet for a moment. Sarah would have loved you. She always believed in second chances. Emma would have followed you around like a shadow, asking 1,000 questions. Mira's eyes burned. I wish I could have known them. Me too. He slipped his arm around her waist. But I think they'd be glad I found you, glad I'm not alone anymore. They stood there until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. When they finally walked back to the cabin, hand in hand, Mira felt something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. But peace never lasted long on the frontier. In September, word reached them that Caroline Mercer, the seamstress from St. Paul, had died in a fire that destroyed her shop. The news came from a traveling peddler who stopped at the cabin, and it hit Mira like a physical blow. That could have been me, she said after the peddler left. If I'd taken that job, I could have been in that building. Rowan pulled her close. But you weren't. You're here. You're safe. Am I? She pulled back, looking at him. Are we? This life we're building, it feels so fragile, like one bad winter or one illness could destroy everything. That's true everywhere, Mira, not just here. But at least in a city there are doctors, neighbors who might help. Here, we're completely alone. We have each other. Is that enough? The question hung between them, unanswerable, because the truth was, neither of them knew. They were making it up as they went along, hoping that love and stubbornness would be enough to see them through. That night, Mira lay awake long after Rowan had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling and thinking about choices. About the life she'd chosen and the one she'd left behind. About whether she'd made the right decision or just traded one kind of struggle for another. But when morning came and Rowan woke beside her, his hand finding hers even before his eyes opened, she knew the answer. This was right. This was home. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. By October, they'd fallen into a rhythm that felt almost sustainable. Rowan's trading trips were shorter now, and he'd established relationships with a few merchants in distant settlements who didn't care about Blackwater Crossing's gossip. They had enough supplies to last through winter, a decent store of preserved food, and a small amount of money saved. But the town's hostility hadn't lessened. If anything, it had intensified now that it was clear Mira and Rowan weren't leaving. The cold shoulders turned into active sabotage. Their mail went missing. Orders were mysteriously canceled. And then, in late October, someone cut their fishing nets. Rowan found them one morning, sliced to ribbons, and left floating in the water near their dock. He stood there for a long time, his hands clenched at his sides, staring at the ruined nets. "Who would do this?" Mira asked. "Could be anyone." His voice was flat. "Half the town, probably. We should report it." "To who? The sheriff?" Rowan laughed bitterly. "He's the same man who told me I was better off alone. You think he's going to care about our nets?" "Then what do we do?" Rowan turned to her, and she saw something dangerous in his eyes. "We survive, just like we always do." But that night, sitting by the fire, he finally spoke the words that had been building between them for months. "Maybe they're right," he said quietly. "Right about what?" "About me. About us." He stared into the flames. "Maybe I am damaged. Maybe I am pulling you down with me." "Stop it. I'm serious, Mira. Look at what your life has become. You're isolated, struggling, fighting every day just to prove you have a right to exist here. Is this really what you wanted?" She set down the shirt she was mending and went to kneel in front of him, forcing him to look at her. "You want to know what I wanted?" she said fiercely. "I wanted to matter. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to build something real instead of just surviving day to day in someone else's world. And that's exactly what I have here. With you. But at what cost? At whatever cost it takes." She gripped his hands. "Rowan, I'm not going to lie and say this is easy. It's not. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. But it's also the most honest. We're not pretending to be something we're not. We're not playing by rules that were designed to keep us small. We're building a life on our own terms, and yes, that means we're going to have enemies. But I'd rather have enemies and have you than have the town's approval and be alone." His eyes searched hers. "You really mean that?" "I really mean that." He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "I don't know what I did to deserve you." "You gave me a ride when I needed one," she said simply. "Everything else just followed." They held each other while the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, and Mira knew that whatever came next, they would face it the same way they'd faced everything else. Together. The first snow came in early November, soft and silent, covering the world in white. Mira woke to find Rowan already up, standing at the window with a cup of coffee, watching the flakes fall. "It's beautiful," she said, coming to stand beside him. "It's a warning." He didn't take his eyes off the sky. "This is early, even for Minnesota. We're in for a hard winter." He was right. By the end of November, the snow was knee-deep, and the temperature had dropped so low that the water in their bucket froze overnight despite being kept inside. Rowan spent every daylight hour chopping wood, building up their supply until the pile reached the eaves of the cabin. Mira worked just as hard, preserving every scrap of food, patching every gap in the walls with clay and moss, preparing for the siege she knew was coming. They made one last trip to Blackwater Crossing in early December, loading the horse with furs to trade for lamp oil, flour, and salt. The town was already half buried in snow, the streets nearly empty. The few people they saw hurried past with their heads down, more concerned with the weather than with gossip. At the general store, the same clerk who'd insulted them months ago looked genuinely worried. "You folks stocked up out there?" he asked, his hostility replaced by something that might have been concern. "This winter's going to be brutal." "We're prepared," Rowan said. "You sure? That cabin of yours is pretty isolated. If something happens, we'll manage." The clerk nodded slowly, then added an extra pound of flour to their order without charging for it. "Just in case," he said gruffly. Rowan stared at him for a moment, then nodded. "Appreciated." On the ride back, Mira said, "That was strange. Winter does that to people. Makes them remember they're human." Rowan adjusted his grip on the reins. "Won't last past spring, but for now, we'll take what we can get." That night, a blizzard hit. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the shutters and forcing snow through every crack. They huddled by the fire, wrapped in blankets, listening to the storm rage outside. It lasted 3 days. When it finally passed, The cabin was nearly buried, with snow drifted halfway up the door. Rowan had to dig them out, shoveling for hours until his clothes were soaked with sweat despite the cold. Mira helped clear the path to the woodpile and the lean-to where their horse stood shivering. They worked in silence, their breath coming in white clouds, their hands numb inside their gloves. "This is just the beginning," Rowan said when they finally stumbled back inside. He was right. December brought storm after storm, each one worse than the last. They lost 2 chickens to the cold despite Rowan's best efforts to insulate their coop. The roof started leaking in one corner, forcing them to set out buckets to catch the drips. And the isolation pressed in on them, days blurring together in an endless cycle of feeding the fire, melting snow for water, and rationing their dwindling supplies. By Christmas, they were both exhausted. Mira's hands were cracked and bleeding from the cold, and Rowan had developed a cough that rattled in his chest. They sat by the fire on Christmas Eve, sharing a meager dinner of salt pork and turnips, and tried not to think about how much winter still lay ahead. "I'm sorry," Rowan said suddenly. Mira looked up. "For what?" "For this. For bringing you out here. For making you live like this. You didn't make me do anything. I should have insisted you go to St. Paul. Should have made you see that you deserve better than—" He gestured around the cabin, at the bucket catching drips, at their sparse meal, at the walls that barely kept out the cold. Mira set down her plate and moved to sit beside him. "Rowan, listen to me. I don't want better. I want this. I want you. And yes, it's hard. And yes, some days I wonder if we're going to make it. But I've never regretted staying. Not once. Even now? Especially now." She took his face in her hands. "Because this is real. This is us fighting for something that matters. And I'd rather fight with you than live easy without you." He kissed her, and for a moment the cold didn't matter. The hunger didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the warmth of his mouth on hers and the solid reality of his arms around her. That night, wrapped together under every blanket they owned, Mira whispered, "I have something to tell you." "What is it?" She hesitated, suddenly nervous. "I think I'm pregnant." Rowan went completely still. "You think?" "I'm almost certain. I'm 2 months late, and I've been sick every morning for the past week." She felt his heart hammering against her back. "I was going to wait until I was sure, but—" "A baby." His voice was rough, barely more than a whisper. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you angry?" "Angry?" He turned her to face him, and his eyes were wet. "Mira, I'm terrified. I'm overwhelmed. I'm 100 different things, but angry isn't one of them. But the timing is terrible. I know." He pressed his forehead to hers. "But we'll figure it out, just like we've figured out everything else. What if something goes wrong? What if I need a doctor and we can't get to town because of the snow? Then we'll handle it ourselves." His hand found her stomach, resting there gently. "We're survivors, remember? Both of us." She wanted to believe him, wanted to share his confidence, but lying there in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside, all she could think about was Sarah and Emma, about how fever had taken them despite Rowan's love, despite his prayers, about how fragile life was out here, how easily it could be snuffed out. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too." He pulled her closer. "But we're scared together. That has to count for something." January was worse than December. The temperature dropped so low that the lake ice groaned and cracked like cannon fire. Their food supplies dwindled despite careful rationing. Rowan's cough worsened, keeping him awake at night and leaving him exhausted during the day. And Mira's pregnancy made everything harder. The constant nausea, the bone-deep fatigue, the way her body seemed to be fighting against her at every turn. One afternoon, as she was trying to mend a rip in Rowan's coat, she started crying and couldn't stop. Great heaving sobs that shook her whole body, months of fear and exhaustion and loneliness pouring out all at once. Rowan found her like that, curled up on the bed, his coat clutched in her hands. He didn't say anything, just climbed in beside her and held her while she cried herself out. "I don't know if I can do this," she said when she finally found her voice. "Yes, you can." "You don't know that." "I do." He wiped the tears from her face. "Because you're the strongest person I've ever met. Because you've survived things that would have broken other people. Because you're still here, still fighting, even when everything feels impossible." "I'm not strong. I'm terrified." Being terrified doesn't mean you're not strong. It just means you understand what's at stake. He took her hand and placed it on her stomach. We're bringing a life into this world, Mira. Our child. And yes, that's scary as hell. But it's also the most hopeful thing either of us has ever done. She looked at him, at the lines of worry etched around his eyes, at the shadows under them from too many sleepless nights. What if we can't protect them? What if something happens and we lose? Then we'll grieve. And we'll survive. Just like I survived losing Sarah and Emma. Just like you survived everything that happened before you came here. His voice was fierce. But we're not going to live our lives assuming the worst. We're going to hope. We're going to fight. And we're going to love this child with everything we have. Something in his words steadied her. She took a shaky breath and nodded. Okay. 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 She sat up, wiping her face. You're right. We can do this. Damn right we can. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't done testing them. In February, a tree fell during a storm and crushed part of their chicken coop, killing their last 3 hens. A week later, their horse came up lame, leaving them without transportation. And then, on a bitter cold morning in late February, Rowan collapsed while chopping wood. Mira heard the thud from inside the cabin. She ran out to find him lying in the snow, his face gray, his breathing shallow. Panic seized her, but she forced it down. She couldn't afford to panic. Not now. She half dragged, half carried him inside, her pregnant belly making the work twice as hard. She got him onto the bed and covered him with blankets, then pressed her hand to his forehead. He was burning up. Rowan, she said, her voice shaking. Rowan, can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open. Mira? I'm here. You collapsed. You're sick. Just tired, he mumbled. Need to rest. You're burning up. This is more than tired. She looked around the cabin frantically, trying to remember what she knew about fevers. I need to get your temperature down. But she didn't have the supplies. Didn't have medicine or willow bark or anything that might help. All she had was snow and blankets and her own desperate hope. For 3 days, Rowan burned with fever. Mira barely left his side, bathing him with snow water, forcing broth between his lips when he could swallow, talking to him constantly to keep him anchored to consciousness. She didn't sleep, couldn't eat, just watched him and prayed to anything that might be listening that he wouldn't leave her. On the 3rd night, his fever broke. He woke clear-eyed and weak, looking up at her with confusion. How long? He rasped. 3 days? Her voice was hoarse from talking. You had a fever, I thought. She couldn't finish the sentence. I'm all right. He tried to sit up and immediately fell back. I'm all right. You're not. She pressed him back down. You're weak as a kitten, and you're going to stay in that bed until you can stand without falling over. Mira, don't argue with me. Her eyes filled with tears. I can't lose you. I can't do this alone. He reached for her hand. You're not going to lose me, and you're never going to be alone. I promise. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. He squeezed her hand weakly. Because I'm too stubborn to die, remember? She laughed, the sound half-sob. You better be. It took Rowan 2 weeks to recover enough to leave the bed, and another week after that before he could do any real work. By then, it was March, and the first signs of spring were beginning to show, the snow melting in patches, the ice on the lake starting to crack, the days growing incrementally longer. And through it all, Mira's pregnancy progressed. Her belly rounded, and she felt the first flutters of movement, butterfly soft at first, then stronger, more insistent. She and Rowan would lie in bed at night, his hand on her stomach, feeling their child move, and for those moments everything else fell away. What do you think it'll be? She asked one night. Healthy, Rowan said immediately, but that's all I care about. But if you had to guess? A girl. He smiled in the darkness. With your stubbornness and my ability to brood. That's a terrifying combination. She'll be perfect. One afternoon in late March, as the snow finally began to recede in earnest, Rowan came into the cabin with an armload of lumber. What's that for? Mira asked. Come outside, I want to show you something. She followed him out to where he'd cleared a space beside the cabin. More lumber was stacked there, along with tools and nails. I've been thinking, he said. The cabin's too small for 3 of us. We need more room. An addition, maybe. Another room for the baby." Mira stared at the lumber, her throat tight. "When did you get all this?" "Traded for it last month. Been hauling it out here bit by bit." He set down the armload and turned to her. "I know things have been hard. I know this winter almost broke us. But we're still here, Mira. We're still standing, and I want to build something that proves we're not just surviving anymore. We're living. We're building a future." "Rowan, let me finish." He took her hands. "I know you could have had an easier life in St. Paul. I know you probably think about that sometimes, especially when things get rough. But I need you to know something. If you wanted to leave now, if you wanted to go find that easier life, I wouldn't stop you. I'd help you get there. Make sure you and the baby were safe and provided for, because I love you too much to keep you somewhere you don't want to be." Mira felt tears streaming down her face. "Is that what you think? That I want to leave?" "I think you deserve the choice. I think you've earned the right to decide what your life looks like, without anyone pressuring you or making you feel trapped." She pulled her hands free and cupped his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I choose this. I choose you. I choose this cabin, and this land, and this life we're building together. Not because I don't have other options, but because this is exactly where I want to be." "Even after everything?" "Especially after everything." She kissed him fiercely. "Because everything we've been through has just proven what I already knew. We're stronger together than we ever were apart, and I'm not giving that up for anything." Rowan's arms came around her, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were wet, but his expression was determined. "Then we build," he said. "We build a home big enough for all of us. We build a life worth living, and we don't let anyone or anything make us doubt that we deserve it." "When do we start?" "Right now." They worked together through the spring, Rowan doing the heavy construction, while Mira measured and planned and did what she could, despite her growing belly. The addition took shape slowly: 4 walls, a roof, a window facing the lake. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid. A room for their child, built with their own hands, a testament to their refusal to give up. By late April, the addition was nearly complete. Rowan was putting in the final window frame when Nora appeared on the path from town. Mira saw her first, recognized her even at a distance. Her stomach clenched. Nora wouldn't come all this way unless something was wrong. "Nora?" she called, hurrying toward her. "What is it? What's wrong?" Nora stopped, breathing hard. She looked older than Mira remembered, more worn. "I had to come warn you." "Warn us about what?" "The town. There's been talk. Angry talk." Nora glanced at Rowan, who'd climbed down from the ladder. "Some of the men are saying you've been stealing, taking game from their trap lines, cutting timber from their claims." "That's a lie," Rowan said flatly. "I don't go near their land." "I know that. You know that. But they don't care about the truth. They're looking for an excuse." Nora's voice dropped. "I think they're planning to come out here, to drive you off." Mira's blood ran cold. "When?" "I don't know. Soon. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. I came as soon as I heard." Nora looked at Mira's swollen belly. "You should leave, both of you. Go somewhere safe until this blows over." "We're not leaving," Rowan said. "Rowan, please. These men, they're angry and drunk and looking for a fight. You can't stand against all of them. Then I'll lose. But I'm not running. This is our home. It's not worth dying for." "Yes," Rowan said quietly. "It is." Nora looked at Mira desperately. "Talk sense into him." But Mira shook her head. "He's right. We're not running anymore. We're staying." "Then you're both fools." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "I thought you were smarter than this." "We're not smart," Mira said. "We're just done being afraid." Nora left an hour later, still begging them to reconsider. They watched her disappear down the path, then turned to look at each other. "What do we do?" Mira asked. "We prepare." Rowan went into the cabin and emerged with his rifle. "And we wait." They spent the rest of the day fortifying the cabin as best they could, barring the shutters, stacking firewood against the door, loading every weapon they had. When darkness fell, they sat together by the fire, the rifle across Rowan's knees, waiting for the sound of hoofbeats that might or might not come. "I'm sorry," Rowan said into the silence. Stop apologizing. If anything happens to you or the baby, nothing's going to happen. Mira's hand rested on her belly, feeling their child move. We're going to be fine. All of us. You can't know that. No, she agreed, but I can choose to believe it. They waited through the night, but no one came. Dawn broke cold and clear, and still they waited. By noon, they'd begun to think maybe Nora had been wrong. Maybe the men had changed their minds. Maybe... The riders appeared just after sunset, 6 of them, carrying torches, riding slowly toward the cabin like an execution party. Rowan stood, checking his rifle. Stay inside. No. Mira stood beside him. We face this together. He looked like he wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. The riders had reached the clearing. Rowan stepped out onto the porch, the rifle held loosely in his hands. Mira stood beside him, her chin lifted, refusing to show fear. The lead rider was a man named Garrett, one of the worst gossips in Blackwater Crossing. He looked at them with undisguised contempt. Ashford, he said, we need to talk. So talk. You've been poaching, taking game from our land. We want it stopped. I haven't taken anything from anyone's land, Rowan said evenly. I trap on my own property. That's not what we heard. Then you heard wrong. Garrett's eyes narrowed. You calling us liars? I'm saying you're mistaken. Rowan's voice stayed calm. I have no quarrel with any of you. I just want to be left alone. Well, that's too bad, because we've got a quarrel with you. Garrett gestured at the cabin. You don't belong here. Never have. You're not part of this community. Don't contribute nothing. Just sit out here like you're too good for the rest of us. I never said I was too good for anyone. Didn't have to. Your whole life says it. Garrett spat into the dirt. Time for you to move on, Ashford. You and your woman. This land could go to someone who'd actually use it proper. This is my land. Legal claim filed and paid for. You don't have any right to tell me to leave. We got every right. We're the people who actually live here, who build this community. You're just a ghost taking up space. Garrett's hand moved toward the pistol at his hip. So you can leave peaceful-like, or we can make you leave. Your choice. Rowan raised the rifle, not pointing it at anyone, but making it clear he could. You're not making me do anything. The other riders tensed, their hands moving toward their own weapons. The moment stretched taut as a wire, everyone waiting for someone to make the first move. And then Mira stepped forward. Wait, she said. Every eye turned to her. She felt the weight of their stares, felt her child moving inside her, felt Rowan's presence solid at her back. And she made a choice. You want to know why we stay here? She said, her voice carrying across the clearing. It's not because we think we're better than you. It's because we're tired of running, tired of living our lives according to other people's rules. My husband lost his family, and I lost everything I had to a man who lied to me. We came out here to heal, to build something real. And you want to take that away from us because we don't fit your idea of what's proper. You don't understand, Garrett started. No, you don't understand. Mira's voice hardened. We're not leaving. This is our home, our land, our life. And if you want to take it from us, you're going to have to kill us for it. Is that really what you want? To murder a man and his pregnant wife because they don't come to your church or your town meetings? The riders shifted uncomfortably. One of them, younger than the others, looked down at his hands. We're not murderers, Garrett said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Then what are you? Mira challenged. What kind of men ride out in the night with torches and guns to threaten people who've done nothing to them? Silence fell. The torches flickered, throwing strange shadows across the faces of the riders. Finally, the young one spoke. Maybe we should go, he said quietly. We came here to settle this, Garrett snapped. By doing what? Burning their cabin with a pregnant woman inside? The young man shook his head. That's not justice. That's just cruelty. She's right about one thing, another rider said slowly. They haven't actually done anything illegal, and if we hurt them, we're no better than common criminals. Garrett looked around at his companions, seeing his support crumbling. His face flushed red with anger and shame. This isn't over, he said finally. Yes, Rowan said quietly. It is. Go home. Leave us alone, and we'll leave you alone. For a long moment, it could have gone either way. Then Garrett yanked his horse's head around and rode off into the darkness, the others following. They sat there and watched until the torches disappeared completely, until even the sound of hoofbeats faded into silence. Only then did Mira's legs give out. She sat down hard on the porch steps, shaking so violently she could barely breathe. Rowan sat beside her, pulling her close. "It's over," he said. "We're safe. For now." "For now," he agreed. "But you did it, Mira. You faced them down and you won." She laughed shakily. "I thought I was going to die." "So did I." He kissed her temple. "But you were magnificent." They sat there until the shaking stopped, until they could stand again. Then they went inside, barred the door, and held each other while their child moved between them, alive and strong and unaware of how close they'd all come to disaster. In the morning, they woke to find the world unchanged. The sun rose over the lake, the birds sang. The addition to their cabin stood solid and real in the spring light. They'd survived the night. They'd survived the winter. They'd survived everything the world had thrown at them. And they were still here, still fighting, still building, still hoping. The days following the confrontation felt strange, suspended between relief and waiting for the next blow. Rowan finished the addition while Mira worked on making it habitable, scrubbing the floor and hanging curtains she'd sewn from old feed sacks. They didn't talk much about what had happened, but the rifle stayed loaded by the door, and neither of them slept deeply anymore. 2 weeks later, Nora came again. This time she brought someone with her. Mira saw them from the window, Nora and an older woman Mira didn't recognize, both carrying baskets. Her first instinct was to bar the door, but Rowan put his hand on her shoulder. "Let's hear what they have to say," he said quietly. The woman with Nora was in her 60s, with kind eyes and work-worn hands. She introduced herself as Margaret Hayes, a midwife who'd delivered half the babies in Blackwater Crossing over the past 30 years. "I heard you were expecting," Margaret said without preamble. "Thought you might need some help when your time comes." Mira's hand went instinctively to her belly. "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask for payment." Margaret set her basket on the table and began unpacking it. Clean cloths, a small bottle of laudanum, packets of herbs. "I don't hold with what those men tried to do. Riding out here like vigilantes, it's shameful." She looked up, meeting Mira's eyes. "So I'm offering my services. When the baby comes, you send for me. I'll be here." "Why would you do that?" Mira's voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I've brought enough children into this world to know that every baby deserves a fighting chance, and every mother deserves someone who knows what they're doing when things get difficult." Margaret's expression softened. "Besides, I lost my own daughter in childbirth 10 years ago. If I can save someone else from that pain, I will." Mira felt tears burning in her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Labor's the hardest thing you'll ever do." Margaret smiled grimly. "But you strike me as someone who's already survived plenty of hard things. You'll get through this too." After Margaret left, promising to come at once when her time arrived, Nora lingered. "I'm sorry," she said, "for not coming with her that night, for not standing with you." "You warned us," Mira said. "That took courage." "Not enough." Nora looked down at her hands. "I've been thinking about what you said, about living by other people's rules. And I realized you were right. I've spent my whole life being scared of what people would think, doing what I was told, never questioning whether any of it was what I actually wanted." She looked up. "You're braver than I am." "I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being afraid." "That's what brave is." Nora smiled. "Anyway, I wanted you to know, you have a friend in town, if you need anything." After she left, Rowan pulled Mira close. "Things are changing," he said. "Maybe." Mira rested her head against his chest. "Or maybe Margaret and Nora are just two decent people in a town full of frightened ones. Either way, it's more than we had before." Spring deepened into summer. The garden flourished, giving them fresh vegetables for the first time in months. Rowan planted a larger crop of corn and beans, betting on a good harvest. The lake teemed with fish, and the forest provided rabbits and the occasional deer. For the first time since they'd married, they had enough. Not abundance, but enough. And Mira grew heavier, slower, her belly swelling until she could barely see her own feet. The baby moved constantly now, pressing against her ribs, making it hard to sleep. She spent her days preparing, sewing tiny clothes from scraps, setting up the cradle Rowan had built, trying to imagine what it would be like to hold her child in her arms. "What if I'm not good at it?" she asked Rowan one night. "What if I don't know how to be a mother?" "Then you'll learn. Same way you learned everything else." He kissed her forehead. "You're going to be wonderful." "You can't know that." "Yes, I can, because I know you. You fight for what you love, and you're going to love this baby with everything you have." In late July, Margaret came to check on her, pressing on her belly with practiced hands, listening to the baby's heartbeat through a wooden tube. "Everything sounds good," she said. "Baby's in the right position. Shouldn't be long now." "How long?" "Could be a week, could be 3. Babies come when they're ready." Margaret packed up her supplies. "But my guess? You've got maybe 2 weeks, less if the baby takes after you and decides to be stubborn." She was right. 12 days later, just after midnight, Mira woke to a tightening across her belly that made her gasp. She lay there for a moment, wondering if she'd imagined it, and then it came again. Stronger this time. "Rowan," she said. He was awake instantly. "What is it?" "I think it's time." He was out of bed before she could say another word, pulling on his boots, lighting the lamp. "I'll get Margaret. You stay here, don't move." "Rowan," she caught his hand. "Breathe, we have time." "How do you know?" "Because this is just the beginning. Margaret said first babies take a while." Another contraction hit, and she squeezed his hand hard. "But you should probably get her soon." He rode into town faster than he'd ever ridden in his life, pounding on Margaret's door until she appeared, already dressed and carrying her bag. "That bad?" she asked. "I don't know. She seems calm, but then we have time." Margaret climbed onto her own horse. "First babies always take forever, but we'll get there well before anything important happens." Back at the cabin, Mira had gotten up and was pacing the floor, one hand pressed to the small of her back. The contractions were coming regularly now, every 10 minutes or so, each one a tightening band around her middle that made her stop and breathe through clenched teeth. Margaret took one look at her and nodded approvingly. "Good. Walking helps. Keep moving as long as you can." The hours that followed blurred together. Morning came, then afternoon, then evening again. The contractions grew closer together, harder, until Mira couldn't walk anymore and had to lean on Rowan while Margaret checked her progress. "You're doing well," Margaret said. "Won't be much longer now." But it was longer, much longer. Night fell again, and still the baby hadn't come. Mira was exhausted, soaked with sweat, beyond pain into some place where nothing existed except the next contraction and the brief respite between them. "I can't," she gasped at one point. "I can't do this anymore." "Yes, you can," Rowan said fiercely. He was kneeling beside the bed, letting her grip his hands hard enough to bruise. "You're the strongest person I know. You can do this. It hurts. I know. But it'll be over soon, and then we'll have our baby. Just hold on a little longer." Margaret appeared with a cup of water, helping Mira drink. "Next time you feel the urge to push, you push as hard as you can. You hear me? Don't hold back." The next contraction hit like a wave, and Mira bore down with everything she had, and then again, and again, until finally, impossibly, she felt something shift and give, and Margaret was saying, "There's the head. One more push." The baby slid into the world with a rush, and Mira collapsed back against the pillows, shaking and sobbing and laughing all at once. She heard Margaret working, heard water being poured, and then, beautifully, miraculously, she heard her baby cry. "It's a girl," Margaret said, smiling. "A perfect, healthy girl." She placed the baby on Mira's chest, this impossibly tiny creature with dark hair and her father's serious eyes. And Mira felt her heart crack open in a way she'd never experienced before. This was love. This was what all the poets had tried and failed to describe. This overwhelming, terrifying, absolute certainty that she would die for this child without a moment's hesitation. "Hello," she whispered, touching the baby's impossibly soft cheek. "Hello, little one." Rowan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his daughter with tears streaming down his face. When he finally looked at Mira, his expression was naked with wonder. "She's real," he said, like he couldn't quite believe it. "She's really here." "She's really here." Mira took his hand and placed it on their daughter's back. and she's perfect. They named her Clara, after Rowan's mother. Margaret stayed for 3 days, teaching Mira how to nurse, how to change a diaper, how to tell the difference between a hungry cry and a tired one. When she finally left, she pressed a small bag into Mira's hands. "Herbs for healing," she said, "and some tea to help with the milk. You're doing fine, but don't hesitate to send for me if you need anything." "I don't know how to thank you." "You already did, by letting me help bring that beautiful baby into the world." Margaret smiled. "Take care of yourself, Mira, and take care of that family of yours." The weeks after Clara's birth were the hardest and sweetest of Mira's life. She was exhausted in a way she'd never been before, waking every 2 hours to nurse, never getting more than a few hours of sleep at a time. Her body ached, her breasts hurt, and she cried at the smallest things. But every time she looked at Clara, sleeping in the cradle Rowan had built, nursing at her breast, staring up at her with those serious dark eyes, she felt a joy so fierce it hurt. Rowan was transformed. He'd been afraid at first, terrified of holding Clara wrong, or dropping her, or somehow failing her the way he felt he'd failed Emma. But slowly, gently, Mira had taught him that babies were sturdier than they looked. Now he carried Clara everywhere, talking to her in a low murmur about the lake and the trees and all the things he was going to teach her when she was older. "You're going to be a hunter," he told her one morning, holding her against his shoulder while Mira cooked breakfast. "Just like your mama, strong and brave and too stubborn to quit." "She's 2 weeks old," Mira said, smiling. "Give her time to grow before you put a rifle in her hands." "I'm just planning ahead." In August, something unexpected happened. People from town started coming to visit. It started with Nora, who brought a hand-knitted blanket and a basket of fresh bread. Then came Margaret again, just to check on Clara's progress. Then the blacksmith's wife, who'd lost her own baby the year before and just wanted to see Clara smile. Slowly, tentatively, a trickle of visitors began arriving at the cabin. Women mostly, bringing small gifts, asking to hold the baby, sharing their own stories of childbirth and motherhood. Not everyone, of course. Garrett and his friends still glared when Mira and Rowan came to town. The general store clerk still overcharged them. But something had shifted. The hostility that had once been universal had fractured, creating small pockets of kindness where before there had been only rejection. "I think they see you differently now," Nora said one afternoon, watching Clara sleep in her arms. "A mother with a baby. It's harder to hate. It reminds them you're human." "We were always human," Mira said quietly. "I know, but fear makes people forget that. It takes something like this to remind them." Nora looked up. "You're changing this town, Mira, whether you mean to or not." That fall brought a good harvest. The corn grew tall and healthy, the beans produced more than they could eat, and Rowan shot a buck that kept them in venison through the winter. They canned and preserved and smoked everything they could, building up their stores with a sense of purpose they hadn't had before. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about building something that would last, something they could pass down to Clara and whatever other children might come. Winter arrived early again, but this time they were ready. The woodpile was twice as large as the year before, the cabin was better sealed, and they had enough food to last until spring without rationing. And this time, they had Clara. The baby changed everything about winter. The long dark nights weren't oppressive anymore. They were cozy. The three of them huddled by the fire while Clara nursed or slept or stared at the flames with wide, wondering eyes. The isolation wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. A chance to be a family without the world's judgment pressing in on them. Rowan carved toys for Clara from scraps of wood. A duck, a horse, a rattle that made her laugh when he shook it. Mira sewed dresses and bonnets, preparing for the spring when Clara would be old enough to sit up and explore. They talked about the future in a way they never had before, making plans that stretched years ahead. "We should expand the garden," Rowan said one night. "Plant more next spring. Maybe get a milk cow if we can afford it." "And chickens," Mira added. "A whole flock of them. Clara should grow up with chickens. And a dog. Every kid needs a dog." They smiled at each other across the firelight, and Mira felt a contentment she'd never expected to experience. This was happiness, not the wild joy of new love or the relief of survival, but something deeper and steadier. The satisfaction of building a life worth living, one day at a time. In February, Margaret came to visit and found Mira pregnant again. "You work fast," she said dryly. Mira blushed. "We didn't plan—" "They never do." Margaret patted her hand. "But your body's healthy and Claire's doing well. You'll be fine. Just take it easy when you can." This pregnancy was different from the first. Mira knew what to expect now, knew the rhythms of her changing body. And with Clara to care for, she didn't have time to dwell on fears or worries. She just moved through each day, doing what needed to be done, trusting that her body knew what it was doing. The second baby came in late October, just after the harvest. Another girl, this one with Mira's lighter coloring and a louder cry. They named her Sarah, and Rowan wept when he held her for the first time. "Thank you," he whispered to Mira, "for giving me this, for giving me a family again." "We gave it to each other," Mira said. The years that followed brought both joy and hardship. There were seasons when the crops failed and they went hungry. Winters when sickness swept through and they nursed each other through fevers and coughs. A summer when fire threatened the cabin and Rowan spent 3 days beating back flames. A spring when the lake flooded and they lost half their garden. But there were also graduations from one milestone to the next. Clara's first steps, Sarah's first words, the day they both learned to swim in the lake. There were birthdays celebrated with honey cakes and small gifts. There were quiet mornings fishing together, loud afternoons playing in the meadow, peaceful evenings reading by the fire. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the town's attitude continued to shift. Garrett moved away after a bad harvest bankrupted him. The general store clerk retired and his son, who'd been one of the riders that night but had spoken up against violence, took over and treated them fairly. New families moved to Blackwater Crossing, families who didn't know the old gossip and didn't care about the Ashfords' history. By the time Clara was 7 and Sarah was 5, Mira and Rowan were no longer outsiders. They were simply the family by the lake. Quiet, self-sufficient, a little strange maybe, but respected nonetheless. One autumn afternoon, a young woman appeared on their path. She was thin and nervous, with a black eye and a carpet bag clutched in her hands. "Mrs. Ashford?" she said hesitantly. "Yes?" "My name is Hannah. I heard someone in town said you might understand, that you might help." Her voice broke. "My husband, I had to leave. I didn't know where else to go." Mira looked at this frightened girl who couldn't have been more than 19, and she saw herself. Saw the woman she'd been that day on the trail when Rowan had offered her a ride, and she made a choice. "Come inside," she said. "You're safe here." Hannah stayed for 3 weeks while Rowan helped her find work in the next town over, far enough from her husband that he wouldn't find her. She helped with the children and the housework, and slowly the fear in her eyes began to fade. "How did you do it?" she asked Mira one night. "How did you start over?" "One day at a time," Mira said, "and with someone who believed I deserved better." She looked at Hannah. "You deserve better too. Don't forget that." After Hannah left, other women came. Word had spread somehow that Mira Ashford would help those who needed it. They came fleeing bad marriages, abusive fathers, impossible situations. Mira fed them, sheltered them, and helped them find their footing. Some stayed only a few days, others stayed for months, but all of them left stronger than they'd arrived. Rowan never complained about the extra mouths to feed or the disruption to their quiet life. Instead, he built another room onto the cabin, creating a space where these broken women could heal. "You're doing important work," he told Mira. "We're doing important work," she corrected. "I couldn't do this without you." By the time Clara was 10 and Sarah was 8, a third daughter had joined them. Rose, born during a particularly harsh winter, but thriving nonetheless. The cabin had grown into a sprawling structure that barely resembled the tiny one-room building Mira had first entered. The garden stretched across a full acre. The stable housed 3 horses, a milk cow, and more chickens than Mira could count. And the lake, the beautiful lake that had witnessed all their struggles and triumphs, remained constant, unchanging, a reminder of where they'd come from and how far they'd traveled. One evening in late summer, when the girls were playing by the water and the sun was setting in shades of gold and rose, Rowan took Mira's hand. "Do you remember that first night?" he asked, "when I found you on the trail? Every detail. Did you ever imagine it would lead to this?" Mira looked at their daughters, Clara teaching Sarah how to skip stones while Rose splashed in the shallows, and felt her throat tighten with emotion. "No," she said honestly. "I thought I was going to die out there. Or worse, survive, but stay broken forever. And now? Now I know that broken things can be mended, that two people who've lost everything can build something beautiful together, that love isn't about being saved or saving someone else. It's about standing beside each other and choosing to keep standing, day after day, no matter what comes. Rowan pulled her close, and they stood like that for a long time, watching their children play, feeling the evening breeze off the lake, grateful for every hard-won moment that had brought them here. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For staying, for fighting, for building this life with me. Thank you for giving me a reason to." She looked up at him, "For seeing me when everyone else looked away." He kissed her, and it tasted like coming home. Years later, when Clara was grown and married herself, she would tell her own daughter about her mother's journey, about the broken wagon wheel that changed everything, about the stranger who offered kindness when the world offered only cruelty, about two people who refused to let their past define their future. "Your grandmother was the bravest person I ever knew," Claire would say. Not because she never felt afraid, but because she felt afraid and chose love anyway. And in the cabin by the lake, now old and weathered but still standing strong, Mira and Rowan would sit together on the porch they'd built with their own hands, watching the sun set over the water, their work-worn fingers interlaced. They had survived everything the frontier had thrown at them: betrayal and loss, hunger and cold, hostility and fear. They had survived it all, and in the process, they had built something that couldn't be destroyed by weather or hardship or small-minded judgment. They had built a family, a home, a legacy of resilience and stubborn hope. And on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the birch trees and the lake reflected the last light of day, Mira would think about that moment on the trail when she'd heard hoofbeats approaching and felt certain her luck had run out. She'd been so afraid, so convinced that nothing good could possibly come from a stranger's offer of help. She had been wrong. The best things in her life had started with that single act of unexpected kindness, with Rowan's quiet voice asking if she was lost, with his steady presence and patient heart, with his willingness to see her not as broken or damaged, but simply as human, as worthy, as someone who deserved a second chance. "What are you thinking about?" Rowan asked, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her hand. "About wheels," Mira said, smiling, "and how sometimes the things that break us are actually breaking us open, making room for something new." "That's pretty philosophical for someone who spent the day chasing chickens." She laughed and leaned her head on his shoulder. "I contain multitudes." "Yes, you do." He kissed the top of her head. "You always have." They sat like that as darkness fell and the stars came out, and Mira felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was what she'd been searching for all those years ago when she left St. Paul with her heart full of hope and her pockets full of stolen dreams. Not safety, not comfort, not even happiness exactly. She'd been searching for belonging, for a place where she could be entirely herself and still be loved, for someone who would stand beside her through the worst and the best and never ask her to be anything other than what she was. She had found all of that and more. In the morning, there would be work to do, wood to chop, meals to cook, animals to tend. There would be challenges and setbacks because that was the nature of life. But there would also be laughter and love, and the simple satisfaction of building something that mattered. And through it all, there would be this: her hand in Rowan's, their children sleeping safely inside, the lake reflecting the moonlight like scattered diamonds. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The broken wagon wheel that had once seemed like the final cruel twist of a heartless fate had actually been the beginning of the most important journey of her life. The journey from survival to living, from fear to courage, from loneliness to love. And standing there on the porch with Rowan beside her and their life spread out before them like a promise kept, Mira Tallwood Ashford knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wouldn't change a single moment of it. Not the pain, not the struggle, not the endless hard work or the cold winters or the town's judgment, because all of it, every brutal, beautiful moment had led her here, home,